Okay, ladies and gents, so this time we're going to have a look at Pythagoras' theorem again, just basic type questions for Foundation GCSE. Now this is video 2, so if you've not seen it already, video 1 will explain the hows and the whys Pythagoras works, along with a more basic explanation and method. But what I'm going to show you now is a quicker method which requires a bit more knowledge, a bit more confidence, and works very well with a calculator. So I'm going to show you this now, but I would recommend looking at video 1 first if you haven't done so yet. So let's jump straight in and have a look and remind ourselves what Pythagoras is. So for any right-angled triangle with shorter sides A and B and a hypotenuse, which means the longest side, which I'm going to call H, some textbooks will call it C, Pythagoras' theorem states that a squared plus b squared equals h squared. So I've got a triangle here where A and B are the shorter sides in any order, and H is the longest side. Now, a few notes, which I mentioned last time in the first video. It doesn't really matter which of the shorter sides are A and B. All that matters is that A and B are the shorter sides, and Pythagoras is used when we know two sides of a triangle and we want to find the other side. We're never bothered about the angles, as long as we know that one of the angles is a right angle. And so if you're given another angle apart from the right angle, or you're only given one side, or you want to find an angle, that's going to be trigonometry. Pythagoras is when you know two sides, you want to work out the other one. So, how to find hypotenuse? So let's just remind ourselves of the general formula. We've got a squared plus b squared equals h squared. And so what I can do is I can change the subject and rewrite this formula h first. And so if I put h squared first, that equals a squared plus b squared. So I'm not doing anything clever, far from it. All I'm doing here is just recopying out the formula, but writing it h squared first. So if I know what h squared is, but I want to work out just h, the opposite of squaring something would be to take the square root. And so if h squared is all of this, then h on its own will be the square root of all of that. And so not just the square root of a squared or the square root of b squared, but the square root of all of a squared plus b squared. So if at this point we remind ourselves that h is the hypotenuse and a and b are the shorter sides, we can put this into words and arrive at this formula which puts it simpler. So the hypotenuse is the first short side all squared plus the second short side all squared, losing my teeth there, all of that square rooted. So with a decent enough calculator, this can be done in one step, which I'll come to in a moment. So I'm going to show you now. So calculate the length of side x. So x is the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always opposite to the right angle, by the way. So going back to what we said earlier, is that the hypotenuse is going to be the square root of 12 squared plus 5 squared. Just to remind you, it comes from this formula here. So we're using the hypotenuse as the first short side squared plus the second short side squared, all of that square rooted. And so if we had the luxury of a calculator, we can type this in one go and see what we get. So here we go. So if I just take this here, type in the tick symbol first for square root, then type in all of this underneath the square root as it appears. So 12 squared plus 5 squared, press equals, and we get 13. Simple as that. So x equals 13 centimeters. Let's try one more. Calculate the length of side x. So again, x is the hypotenuse. The two sides we have here are 8 and 1.8. So in the same way, just remind ourselves of this formula. So because we're working out the longest side, that's going to be the square root of the first short side squared. Doesn't matter which one you pick first. Let's go for 1.8 squared plus the other shorter one, also squared. That's the square root of all of that. So let's type this in on our calculator. So 1.8 squared plus 8 squared, press equals, we get 41 over 5. Press SROD to convert it into decimal form, and we get 8.2 meters. The units were in meters for the other two sides, and so the third side will also be in meters. Now this one is a non-calculator example, so let's imagine we want to use this method, but it's on a paper one, it's a non-calculator paper. How might we do it? And so what we can do is set it out in the same way, and we can say that x, the hypotenuse, equals the square root of 6 squared plus 8 squared. So we're setting it out in the same way to start with, only now we don't have the luxury of a scientific calculator. What we can do is just work it out piece by piece. So the first thing we need to think about is what on earth is 6 squared? Well, 6 squared just means 6 multiplied by itself. 6 multiplied by 6 is 36. So what we're doing here is we're doing BIDMAS within the square root symbol. So we're going to add up last, do the powers first. Secondly, we've got 8 squared. 8 squared means 8 multiplied by 8. And if you're careful enough, you should find that's 64. So now within the square root symbol, we've only got the addition to do. So 36 plus 64 will come to a nice even 100. Then we know what we're square rooting, it's just 100. We can finally square root what we know we need to square root, which is 100. So what number multiplied by itself would give us 100? That would be 10, because 10 times 10 is 100. Therefore, the square root of 100 is 10. Don't forget the units, 10 centimeters. And that's all we need to do. So without further ado, it's your turn. So one side's 3, the other side's 4. We need to work out the hypotenuse, calculate the length of side x, maybe pause the video. So try that now in your textbook or in your notes. Press play when you want to see the answer. Okay, shall we have a look at what the answer is? You should have found that x equals 5 centimeters. This is a classic 3, 4, 5 triangle. And this is the steps you could take without a calculator to work out what x would be. Next up, a few questions for you to have a go at. Each one we're finding the hypotenuse. I'd like you to have a go at finding the hypotenuses for each of these triangles below. Round your answers off to 1 decimal place if needed, if you get a decimal answer. So again, press pause, have a go at these, press play when you want to check your answers. So have a go now. So I'm going to reveal the answers now for questions 1, 2 and 3. Question 1, 8.5 millimeters. Question 2, 22.5 kilometers. And question 3, you should have found that was 22.4 meters. So we've practiced now finding the hypotenuse using this method. So how about finding, you've guessed it, a shorter side? So going back to Pythagoras' formula, a squared plus b squared equals h squared. We said before, it doesn't matter which of a and b is the shortest side. All it matters is, in some order, a and b are the shorter ones. So let's focus on a. So we wanted to have a on its own. So we could subtract b squared from both sides. In effect, I imagine this as this b squared, which is a positive thing, we can swap to the other side. But if we swap the side, we swap the sign. Opposite of plus is subtract. And so a squared would equal h squared minus b squared. We want to work out what the side is, which is just a on its own, not a squared. So we want to square root all of what a squared is equal to. And so a is going to be h squared minus b squared, all of that square rooted. And then if we remember what h is and what b is, h is the longest side and b is the other shorter side, we can put this into words and try and make a bit more sense of it. by writing it like this. So the shorter side you're trying to find is the square root of the hypotenuse squared minus the other short side that you do know squared. So let's try and apply this, shall we? So first of all, calculate the side x. Now this time you need to recognise that the hypotenuse is 25. That's been given to us. So just to remind ourselves of what we talked about before, because we know what the longest side is, which is 25, we want to work out what x is, which is on one of the shorter sides. And so if we call this x, x will be the square root of the hypotenuse squared. Hypotenuse is 25 squared. Subtract the other short side, which we know. The two short sides are x and 7, and so it'll be 25 squared minus the 7 squared. So if we just pop this into our calculator, 25 squared minus 7 squared, you should find that's 24 centimeters. Next one, calculate the length of side x. So yet again, we're told the hypotenuse, which is 13. The two shorter sides are 5 and x. So we can use this formula here. So the short side, which we're trying to find, which is x, is the square root of the hypotenuse, 13 squared, minus the short side we do know, all squared. So if you get out your trusted calculator, press tick, 1/3 squared minus 5 squared gives us 12. And so x would be 12 centimeters. So again, it comes down to your turn. Calculate the length of side x. Take a minute or two, pause the video if you need to, and then press play when you're ready to find out if you're correct. So let's see what the solution is. You should have found that x equals 13 meters. It's a square root of 85 squared minus 84 squared. So, hypotenuse or shorter side. You need to know the key difference between finding one or the other. And so what I've got for you here is this triangle, which is 60, 11, and x. So if we're finding the length of side x, which in this case is of hypotenuse, x would be the square root of 60 squared plus 11 squared. Which, if we were to try that, 60 squared plus 11 squared, that'll give us 61. So I've got a calculator image here. Just what we did, 60 squared plus 11 squared. So if you're finding the longer side, it's 1 square plus the other square, all square rooted. What I've got here though is the same triangle again, but now we're imagining it as a different question. So this time I'm going to say that we knew that was 61, we know that was 11, but let's imagine we didn't know that this one was 60. How could we calculate x if we didn't know it was 60? Well, this time we're trying to find a shorter side. 61's the longest for hypotenuse, 11's the other shorter side. So going back to what we had earlier, to find a short side, it's the square root of the hypotenuse squared minus the short side you do know, all squared. If you put that into your calculator, you shouldn't be too surprised based on the fact I've told you it's the same triangle, but you should find that it's 60. So let's see, 61 squared minus 11 squared equals 60. And so the calculator image for this is this one. And so what I want you to do is have a look at these two calculator images and see just how similar they are. So Pythagoras, if you're trying to find one side, you'll know the other two. Assuming it's a right angled triangle and you've checked it's a right angled triangle, if it's the longer side you're trying to find, the hypotenuse, it'll be one square plus the other square, all underneath the square root symbol. If it's a short side you're trying to find, it's one square minus the other square, you know, all square rooted. So as you can see, both are very, very similar, but the longest side involves a plus of the squares, the shorter side involves a minus, which in a sense does make quite a lot of sense. If you want to find the bigger thing, you'll add. Typically, smaller than adding will be when you subtract. So these are the two main differences, which if you want to use this method, you need to pay particular attention to. So just have a look at these two, commit them to memory, and then we can move on. So putting all this together, what I've got for you here, whoops, a daisy, almost spoiled the game there. I want you to apply the basics here on this mini exercise. So what we've got here is a selection of 8 different questions, some of which you need to find the longest side, some of which you need to find the shorter side. So your job now is to find the missing sides, and just a little note from me, take care. Think if you're trying to find the hypotenuse or a shorter side. Give your answers to one decimal place where appropriate. So for these 8 questions, let's just say, allow yourself some thinking time so you're not rushing. 8 questions, give yourself 10 minutes. Now you might be able to do it much quicker than 10 minutes, but it's not a race. It's just about seeing that you can understand how to apply this method. So pause the video now and have a go. Press play when you're wanting to check your solutions against mine. So have a go now. Okay, I'm going to now reveal the answers to you. So the answers to these are as follows. And what I've done here is put into the boxes the methods used each time. So if your answers don't agree with mine, just be thinking, were you trying to find the hypotenuse or the shorter side? Were you wanting to add the squares or do one square minus the other square? So it will take practice, but with practice, you'll find that this method is very reliable and also incredibly quick. And so that's more or less it really for basic Pythagoras. As long as you know these basics, you can also apply this to harder questions. Pythagoras boils down to what we've done here in these couple of videos. Okay, I hope you found that useful. Do keep working, do keep practicing, and if you have any other topics you'd like me to run through at some point, do leave a comment in the comments section, and I'll do my best to get back to you and see if I can help you out. Okay, thanks for listening, and good luck with your maths.